In 2001, David J. founded the Asexual Visibility and Education Network, one of the first websites to acknowledge asexuality as a sexual orientation. An asexual person is defined as a person who does not experience sexual attraction. In other words, someone who doesn't look at people of any gender and think, I'd really like to have sex with them. People who had previously felt broken or confused in their identity flocked to the site, excited to finally have a word that described how they felt about other people. New labels like demisexual, lithsexual, apothosexual, and more arose from the community, and the asexual community began to build space for themselves in the greater LGBTQ+ community. By doing so, the asexual community began to ask questions, which examined some of our most fundamental assumptions of sexuality. What did asexuality ask that was so critical? Well, for the most part, when we're thinking about sexuality, we think about spectra. One of the most famous of these is the Kinsey scale, developed by our own Bowdoin alum. The Kinsey scale will give you a score between 0, which is completely straight, and 6, which is completely gay. So you could score about a 3, or about 50% into men, 50% into women. You could score a 1, or 86% straight, 14% gay. It's very clear and very simple. It's also an easy way to talk about sexuality because it presumes that previous behaviors can predict future attraction. Indeed, the way the Kinsey scale gives this score is through a self-report of previous sexual and romantic behaviors. So because these sorts of conversations and spectra are so standard in queer conversations, the asexual community began to try to build a spectrum of its own. However, the problems with putting asexual identities on a spectrum become obvious, honestly, the minute you even try to set the endpoints. So over here we have asexuality, right? 0% sexual attraction, someone who's not sexually attracted to anyone. That one's easy. And then we get over here to what? 100% sexual attraction? Or someone who's sexually attracted to everyone they meet? There are certainly people like this, and their identities are completely valid. But most of us wouldn't consider them the standard straight to asexual as queer, so to speak. The asexual community, for the most part, has chosen to define this endpoint as allosexual, which is defined as a person who is not asexual. Now, this is a kind of bizarre definition because it defines people by what they're not what they are. So if I gave you that definition with no additional information, such as what an asexual person is, you wouldn't necessarily know whether or not you fit the definition of allosexual. It also doesn't really tell us what an allosexual person does. So if you listed all of your experiences and feelings and everything you thought to me, I still couldn't necessarily tell you whether or not you would be considered an allosexual person. But okay, whatever. Endpoints or none, we have a whole spectrum to discuss. So let's skip to the supposed midpoint, demisexual. Now, a demisexual person is not someone who experiences sexual attraction 50% of the time, or to 50% of the people they meet. If only because, honestly, that would still feel like a lot of people to be attracted to, even for an allosexual person. No, a demisexual person is someone who does not experience sexual attraction until after a close platonic or romantic bond is formed with someone. Importantly, this doesn't focus on the sort of person that the demisexual person will be attracted to. Instead, it focuses on the relationship that could lead to sexual attraction. This sort of relationship-based identity is honestly the norm in asexual conversations. You have cupiosexual people, who are people that do not experience sexual attraction, but do desire a sexual relationship. You have lithsexual people, who do experience sexual attraction, but if this attraction is reciprocated, the lithsexual person's attraction will fade. Even people who identify as gray asexual, specifically referring to the gray space between asexual and allosexual, often identify this way because they only experience sexual attraction maybe in a limited number of circumstances, or to one or two people. Again and again, asexuality assumes that sexuality is best defined as the interactions between one or more people, as opposed to our usual assumptions of sexuality, which is some stable sort of person that we'll be sexually attracted to. Now, this sort of relationship-based changing sexuality is space that we give to straight people, by which I'll here define as heterosexual heteroromantic people, or people who experience both sexual and romantic attraction to people of the same gender and often the same people. So straight people will often give themselves a sort of identity. We'll talk about having a type, the sort of person that you find sexually attractive, within a specific gender, of course. So I might say that I like men who are tall, dark, and handsome, the same way that I might say that I like men, or women, or nobody at all. However, it's quite possible that there will be tall, dark, handsome men that I won't find attractive. It's also possible that I'll end up falling madly in love with a short, traditionally unattractive man. Nobody would begrudge me either of these. And in fact, oftentimes we'll see falling in love with people outside of our type as a less superficial form of love, because presumably it's not love based purely on physical appearance. However, we assume that attraction to a certain gender or genders is set. So if I identify as a straight woman, and then I bring my girlfriend home for Christmas dinner, my family wouldn't applaud me for looking outside my type. Instead, they'd probably be incredibly confused. Am I a lesbian now? Bi? If I said that my identity didn't change at all, I just fell in love this one time, most people wouldn't accept that as real. How can I be straight if I'm falling in love with a girl? Doesn't that mean that I'm wrong about my identity? Identities, we assume, are set, predictive, and clear, that they'll exist the same throughout our entire lifespan. However, that's simply not how it works in reality. Now, before I go on, I want to make it very clear that I understand the need for identities right now. As a non-straight person myself, I understand that we live in a culture that's made it clear to us for generations that we're not necessarily welcome in it. Queer people are harassed, assaulted, thrown out of their homes, and bullied into suicide every day. The National Coalition of Anti-Violence Programs reported more than 13,000 hate crimes in 2014 alone. So I understand that this is a scary world, that people need identities to make it less scary, to give us communities where we know that we won't be told that we're disgusting or broken or wrong, to give us spaces where we understand how we're supposed to fit into this world. So I'm not saying that you should all go to your gay friends after this and tell them that you heard a TED Talk that says they're actually not gay and so they really can't identify like that anymore. Identities are something we give ourselves. They're empowering because we take them on. When other people give us identities, they're saying that they believe that they know who we are better than we know ourselves, which can be incredibly condescending. However, when talking about asexual identities, and specifically oftentimes trying to erase asexual identities, allosexual people asked, honestly, one of the queerest questions that I've ever heard. So when an asexual person comes out, oftentimes people will say, well, how do you know that you're asexual if you haven't met everyone yet? Maybe you just haven't found the one and you're actually straight, which is, I think a fundamental misunderstanding of how being straight works. Like, I didn't experience sexual attraction until I was 20 years old, which most people would consider just like a little bit late, even for a late bloomer. And it's also often used as an attempt to silence or erase asexual stories, so we don't have to hear what they're saying about their experiences in the world. On the other hand, I have to admit, good question. How does an asexual person know that they're asexual if they haven't met everyone yet? How does a straight person know that they're not attracted to anyone of the same gender if they haven't met everyone yet? This isn't a trick question. The truth is, none of us do. None of us have the ability to predict the future. However, we expect this of queer people, and honestly of all people, that they'll be able to tell us exactly the sort of genders of people that they'll be attracted to. However, all this sort of assumption does is set people up for heartbreak. And it is heartbreak. Changing identities is stressful. It involves soul-searching, often panic. You have to figure out how you're going to fit all of the experiences of your life, including this one different one, into one little word. Like I said, I didn't experience sexual attraction until I was 20 years old. This year, in fact. Before then, I was known on campus, and honestly in every community I was a part of, as a big, outspoken asexual activist. So when I realized that I was falling in love with my current boyfriend, I didn't get the sort of butterflies and joy that I've been told comes with a first love. Instead, I got a sort of anxiety. First of all, I was going to have to tell so many people. Right off the bat, there was him, because he knew that I was asexual and aromantic, and he was very accepting of that fact, so this was going to come as a little bit of a surprise to him. But then there was my community. Was I still going to be welcomed and accepted in there now that I wasn't 100% asexual? Was it even reasonable for me to call myself the president of an asexual community if I was experiencing sexual attraction? Luckily, one of my good friends leads these communities with me, and he was able to tell me that I was being silly. That of course my community would still love and accept me, and of course I still had a place in it as a leader, if only because I still wasn't 100% allo. But then we got to the really scary part, which is friends, family, and acquaintances. Now, I'm a member of a fairly small, newly recognized identity, so for most people, I was the first asexual person they'd ever met. I spent a lot of time after coming out, and honestly to this day, fighting for space, for my people like myself and my identity to be accepted. So there were people in this world who were convinced of asexuality because of their experiences with me. What was going to happen when I came out to them a second time? I was terrified, and I honestly still am, that I would be used as a weapon against my own community. That people would say, well, Julianna said she was asexual, and now she has a boyfriend, so clearly it is just a phase. And that is the fundamental problem with assuming that sexualities are set. They aren't. None of us can predict our future. But when we require that people have the same sexuality forever, or they have some big process that gives us the opportunity to question whether or not their whole identity exists, because if it did, why are so many people leaving that identity? We force people back into a different sort of closet, where they have to decide between existing as who they are and risking, honestly, the entire community of people who have supported and welcomed them since then. Now, there's a solution to all this, and it's actually really simple. Stop assuming that attraction will be stable throughout a lifespan, and stop requiring people to use labels to identify themselves. If people do choose to use labels, great, accept that wholeheartedly. But don't make it a requirement, and don't ask people for their labels. We don't all have them, and honestly, they don't always make sense for anybody. Love should be happy and joyful. It shouldn't be scary and painful. Accept attraction as it comes. Don't try to explain it and force it into all of the other situations you've had. Don't try to find words that'll explain something that maybe just is inexplicable. Feel attraction freely. It'll come, or it won't. But either way, at least it won't cause more pain than happiness. Thank you.